It's the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen and me, I'm Phil Dobbie. Today, house prices. We know they're out of control in Australia and Canada and New Zealand, where new regulations will stop foreign buyers from buying houses. Will that make any difference? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast. Yes, from October, New Zealand will limit the purchases of homes by foreigners under the Overseas Investment Amendment Bill. It was pushed through Parliament by the Associate Finance Minister, David Parker, who said New Zealanders should not be outbid by wealthier foreign buyers. And the situation there is pretty much like it is in Australia. House prices have surged. It's also a time of record immigration. So are those two factors linked? And home ownership in New Zealand is at the lowest level since 1951. So will this new plan work? Well, Steve, we've spoken often and you've written a lot about the Australian housing market and how it's ready for a crash. Well, look, maybe that started because figures for July 2018 show Sydney house prices year on year have fallen more than 5% in 1 year. That's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's going to keep on going. People are guessing about 20. I think my original
40%. You said many years ago, didn't you?
It was an analogy to Japan. Okay, the actual statement, it was in relation to a question from Kerry O'Brien on the 7:30 report, was that Japanese house prices fell 40% after their bubble peaked, and I see no reason why we will avoid the same fate. And then to go to that bloody bet with old Rory Robertson, when Rory said I was most famous about for having predicted house price falls, which is a bit weird because you don't get on the 7:30 report for half the show without already being famous, and that's where I actually first made the comment. But when he made his bet, we started making his bet offer. I said, over the next 10 to 15 years, mate. And that was in October 2008. So the statute of limitations on that bet is 2023. But certainly, I think the odds are there for something of the order of a 40% or more fall in house price.
By 2023, you think you might still...
By 2023.
Right, okay. Well,
from its peak, whatever that might be. I think the peak is certainly
I think the peak was
behind us.
Well, yeah, last year, I think. I mean, it was... because I think the year before that, it was like almost up 10% in Sydney. So you'd have to take that as the peak. And now we're down 5% in this year. So we'll see how it goes. But look, to give people outside Australia some context in this, 2-bedroom apartment close to the city centre in Sydney, a very small one is just under $1.5 million in a tower block. That is actually quite a good deal because the median house price in Sydney is around $1.1 million. And it's a big city, and there's a lot of people living a long way out west in not the best housing, and that's included in that median. So $1.1 million dollars. That's a lot of money, isn't it?
It's about 700,000 US, isn't it? Where they put it in terms of
something
figures
like that.
Actually people can relate to. And certainly of the order, say, £600,000. So, yeah, a small 2-bedroom apartment in a tower block at that price, that's the cost of living down under. It ain't cheap.
And so I wonder to what extent, and look, I really want to talk about New Zealand as well and the policy that's been introduced there. We'll do that in just a second. But I just wonder how big a policy failure is Australia, particularly Sydney, because what is propping up that housing, and perhaps why you got the figure wrong or it's been delayed, is because, of course, the huge level of migration into the city. But we also have a slowing population growth rate in Sydney. So I wonder whether, in fact, the projections about what because you see these massive projections for Sydney being a city of 8 million people in not so many years. I wonder whether they're going to get there with given housing affordability, because the population growth rate is actually slowing. So it's 4.1% in 2015, 3.9% in 2016, 2.3% in 2017. So you've got a slowing growth rate. And what you've also got is almost all of the net growth in the city is from migrants from overseas. People, the net migration within Australia is out of Sydney, if you see what I mean. People, in other words, people in Sydney are selling up and moving to Brisbane. Is the common destination. So there's something wrong with the whole approach, isn't there? The housing policy in Sydney, which is only surviving because so many people want to move to Australia, and Sydney is their city of choice. But after they've been there for a while, they get out and move somewhere cheaper.
Because they realise it's just impossible to buy a place there in the first instance. This is I've just been doing, of course, doing some work on this. Do a blog post about it in the very near future. And I looked at long-term price series, and the best long-term price series is put together by Robert Schiller in the United States, where he has what he call a quality-adjusted price index, or what he does is he actually looks at the sale prices of the same house over time. So it's a very detailed database rather than being an average for an entire city where you might be, at one point in time, you might be comparing a 50 square metre apartment as an average for being built at a particular point in the history of a city to 150 sometime later. No, these are exactly the same properties.
No, but they'll be done up, though, won't they? Almost every house gets added to.
Done up, sometimes done down, but mainly done up. But he does a quality adjustment as well. And that price index, when you look at it, shows the extreme nature of the bubble that occurred in 2005, 2006 in America, because the index, you go right back to 1980, then the index started, 1890, pardon me. Go right back to 1890, the index started at 100. I'm taking it, I've rebased it to start from the beginning of the century. So starting at 100, it stays at 100 with a few fluctuations up and down, mainly down, in fact, all the way out to 1997. And then it peaks at 190 during the subprime bubble. It fell in the bottom to 125. It's now back to 170. But it was actually, in effect, the long-term price, and this is inflation adjusted for America, in 2006 peaked at pretty much twice the average for the entire period. Now, I decided to look at a not as well constructed data series. A guy called Nigel Stapleton at the University of New South Wales put this together for his PhD thesis. He subsequently been head of school there, from my recollection. But he put together a series which doesn't compare like with like as much, but it gives you an index of house prices going back as far in Australia. Now, I graphed that, and I think, and it's one of the times my jaw hit the floor, even though I expected it to be extreme. That index, again, shows no movement between 1900 and 1950. So it starts at 100 and 1900. By 1950, it's 100. Actually, in fact, it actually goes down below 100. So it's in 1948, 49, it's 99.8. It's pretty much 100. It then leaps, and I'm not quite certain what causes the leap, quite dramatically in 1950. So I've got a feeling that I should actually regard 1950 as the start of the series. It gets up to 2.5 times long-term average, falls down again, and now we're talking let's start with my birthday. 1953, March, it's 176. That's still a substantial increase. You would expect it to fall from that. Its current value is 1,210.
Well,
there has been a sextupling of house prices between my birth and today.
Mind you, he is quite old, isn't he? Look, we will explore this whole topic further, including that question where we started. Are the Kiwis, are the New Zealanders right to ban foreign home buyers? Will it really make any difference? Or are there other things which are really driving this rise in house prices? And is there anything at all that can stop the ultimate collapse in places like New Zealand and Australia and Canada? We'll look at that in the full version of this podcast. If you want to hear it in full, you need to subscribe. And to do that, you can go to debunkingeconomics.com and pick one of the subscription options in the right-hand side. Or you can become a supporter of Steve on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen. If you pledge $10 or more support to his work each month, then you'll get access to this and all the other podcasts in this series. We'll be back again here with another one very soon. Thank you for listening.